Is the Washington Commanders roster stronger than it was a year ago when they made it all the way to the NFC conference title game? We'll talk all about that. Also on the docket, is Chris Rodriguez ready to assume the role as the featured back for this Commanders team? And when will Bill Merritt be able to be the featured back? Is he going to be the featured back this year? What about the role of newly acquired Donovan Edwards in the backfield? What will he do this year? We'll also briefly discuss the whole Micah Parsons trade because, of course, we like dissecting news about them Cowboys. And of course, we talk Terry McLaurin, Jayden Daniels, and much, much more in today's Washington Football Maniacs podcast. Let's get to it.
The Washington Football Maniacs.
Hello, football fans. Welcome to the Washington Football Maniacs podcast, a podcast where the most rabid of all Washington football fans come to give homage to the world's best football team, the Washington Commanders. I'm your host, Greg Sykes, and we have a lot to cover in today, so let's get into this, shall we? So all of the NFL had to get down to their final 53-man roster on Tuesday, and the Commanders also fielded who they feel can lead this team to the promised land in 2025, with very few surprises, in my opinion. Now, I did a video earlier where I had talked about who I thought the Commanders would cut, who would make the 53-man roster. Some names I didn't really specify. I basically say at the end, if they don't make the 53-man roster from this, you'll probably see them back on the practice squad. And honestly, for the most part, there wasn't very many that I had missed on. But this video, of course, is not all about me, boasting how well I did picking, who the 53-man roster was going to be. Honestly, I think most people could have probably figured it out, but certainly there are just a few surprises. The Commanders also, of course, retained those sent on the waiver wire, such as, players like Sam Hartman. I know there was a little bit of controversy about him, like, why are we keeping him? Why are we, putting him on the practice squad? He had such a horrible preseason. Do keep in mind, folks, he did have shoulder surgery, okay? And so he wasn't 100%. Let's see how he does next preseason. Maybe he doesn't even make it the full time on this roster, or not the roster actually, but the practice squad. So let's just see what happens. But I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But I do agree he did not have a very good preseason. Certainly a surprise. Some disappointment, I guess, for a lot of people. Wide receiver Ja'Cory Brooks was waived, but he was also picked to back up on the practice squad. So there are some cheers on that one. A lot of people are big fans of Brooks and honestly feel like that he should have been picked over Luke McCaffrey. I don't know. There's a lot of factors that go into all of that. One being special teams. Luke McCaffrey is not afraid to play special teams. Not saying that Brooks is afraid. I'm just saying Luke McCaffrey is going to do whatever he could to make this team. And even though he didn't have the best of preseason, he was going to be out there on the special teams doing what he can for this team. I expect him to be much better this year. We'll see. But that's just what happens. Brooks, again, he was, I believe Brooks was undrafted. Of course, Luke McCaffrey drafted in the 5th round. It's kind of hard to make that decision. I know some people are saying he only made the team because of that last name. Let's not really get into that argument because I don't think him, being the son of Ed and being the brother of Christian would really have any pull, honestly, with him making a team or not, especially the Washington Commanders, we've already seen they're going to cut players they feel like need to be cut that didn't show them enough. Yes, you can certainly make the argument. What really did Luke McCaffrey show us? Not a whole lot in the preseason, but I trust our coaching staff. So, that's really about all I have to say about that. However, the Commanders do plan to entertain wide receiver free agent Kendrick Bourne on Tuesday of next week. Kendrick is a free agent wide receiver who's been going around and visiting teams, visiting San Francisco, going to visit us next. So, with that, of course, the Commanders only kept 5 wide receivers on the active roster. So maybe that they were making plans to add somebody else. Maybe they just want to see how Ja'Cory Brooks does in the practice squad until he's ready to be elevated. Who knows? But there's room. And I think Bourne certainly would strengthen that wide receiving core, which I feel like is coming together pretty good. Which brings me to this point, though. How strong is this overall roster of the Washington Commanders to begin with? Now, I would have to say, if you are looking at the biggest strength on the Washington Commanders right now, is probably the linebacker core. You got Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, and Von Miller, which I keep forgetting. I keep looking at Von Miller as an edge rusher, but he is a linebacker. And, of course, those guys are going to be the biggest faces of that group. So, expect big things out of them. I expect good things out of guys like Kane Madrino. I think that he is going to put in some quality minutes for that linebacker core. And, of course, there's Nick Bolero and Jordan McGee rounding out the rest of the depth for the linebacker squad. But many feel that is the strength of the Washington Commanders. So if they're the strength, who is the weak? Who's the weak link, right? Who is the weak link? Well, I would say that a lot of people would probably still consider the secondary the weak link. But I will say this. I believe Adam Peters and Dan Quinn have done a fantastic job in building that secondary up. Of course, you got Marshawn Lattimore, who was added on during the middle of last season. He's 100% healthy now. Mikey Sandstrill, who had what I thought a fantastic rookie season last year. He's going to be back there at it again this year. We added Trey Amos, a lot of expectations for Trey Amos. And I think he was an excellent pick. A lot of people said he was a steal of a pick. Let's see. Outside corner, of course, along with Lattimore, is what Amos expects to play mostly, which means you can move Sandstrill into the inside, and I think that's going to be a strong secondary there. And then you got to talk about the safety position. So maybe safety is going to be more of the weak link. Well, you got Quan Martin, who honestly I'm expecting big things out of Quan Martin. Quan came on and really started playing well throughout last season. Had that big pick 6 in last year's NFC divisional playoff game against the Detroit Lions. And so far, he played really well in preseason. So I think he's ready to have a huge breakout year this year. Then you got guys like Will Harris that we've signed. Jeremy Reeves, who has always kind of been our special teams ace, finally has been able to work his way onto the defense to get some more minutes on the defense. To me, when you look at all this, yeah, there's still question marks, right? But on the surface, I'm not seeing this being such a weak link of the whole team. I really don't. You got the rest of the guys, Tyler Owens, Jonathan Jones, Percy Butler. Maybe a little question mark with Percy Butler. He's definitely really good on special teams. Noah Igby. Now, they have been shopping Noah. That's pretty interesting that Igby could be off somewhere else. I thought he's played really well for the Commanders when he's had to. So for him to be expendable tells you that they feel like they've got a much stronger secondary. But we're going back to the question mark question, right? And again, my opinion, I think it's the defensive front because we've got a lot of changes, right? Finally, Jonathan Allen was the last of those big first rounders. Well, I guess Deron Payne first rounder, right? So he's like the last one. But seemed like it was always Jonathan. It was Jonathan Allen. It was Montez Sweat. Chase Young. Seemed like those three guys, and then of course, Deron Payne. It always seemed like, of course, Deron Payne, almost like he's an afterthought, right? I mean, I hate that, but to me, that seems like since most of those guys are gone, Deron Payne is the only one who's been consistently there. But we've also seen really good things out of Johnny Newton. I think Dorrance Armstrong played really well last year. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, he's a young guy, but I think he can add some quality minutes. But the beast that I really want to see is Javon Kinlaw. A lot of people are excited about Javon Kinlaw. The guy's huge. Guys swallow people up. I mean, I really want to see how these guys can get in there to stop the run. I feel like there's more emphasis, even though you go and you look at some of these guys, I think even Kinlaw, and there might have been a question about, maybe he's not as good with stopping the run. Certainly still got to put pressure on the quarterback. That right there we saw in preseason. I don't think there's an issue with that. We're going to get after the quarterback all season long. No question. Quarterback is going to suffer this season. But the running game is what killed us last year against this defense. And so we know that is something that the Commanders need to address. Now, of course, if you take a look at the strong points of Ron Rivera's version of this team, all number ones across the board on that defensive front, that was clearly the strength of the Washington football team, the Washington Commanders, when Ron Rivera was here. But now it's like you don't have as many of those first rounders there, but you do have guys who come in and they get the job done. Blue collar players that come in. Difference between blue collar and blue chip, I know, but you have these guys who come in who know how to get the job done. Do your job is what Bill Belichick would always say. And so I think you got a lot of guys like that, but the question mark's really going to come down to, can they stop the run? Because you're going to have to stop the run against the Eagles. Saquon Barkley is the reason why the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year. He's the reason why they even got to the playoffs, in my opinion. And I'm not taking any away from Jalen Hurts, but let's just put it to you like it is. Saquon Barkley is a game changer. And so you got to be able to build your defense to stop guys like that. So I want to see, can these guys stop the run? I mean, the Commanders were horrible against the run last year. And so if this unit can fare better, I definitely want to see that. I mean, again, you're going to have a lot of success, I think, against the quarterbacks all year. Von Miller, of course. Do I need to say more about Von Miller? I mean, he's 36 years old. I want to see what he can do. I'm excited for this. Dorrance Armstrong, Deron Payne, all these guys. It's going to be fantastic. But I will say, yes, that defensive front, I want to see how well they fare because they've had a lot of personnel changes in the past couple of seasons. But let's go back to the running back thing. We mentioned this earlier, but the Commanders, of course, traded away Brian Robinson to the San Francisco 49ers. So the question now is, well, who's going to be RB1 for the Commanders? Most are feeling that Bill Merritt, of course, he's a 7th round draft pick. Again, we talked about him being more of a 3rd round talent, but, because of whatever legalities that happened in his last year of college, he wasn't eligible to play, and so that knocked him down in the draft. So he got drafted. Now, this is actually the guy I think everyone was saying was the steal of the draft, but Bill Merritt. What's going to happen with him? There's some people who are saying he may not even be active week 1. I don't know. I don't understand why, but it almost sounds like the Commanders are willing to have 3 running backs active per game, which would be Chris Rodriguez, because of course he has the experience. But Chris Rodriguez, Austin Eckler, Jeremy McNichols. And I have to say, I'm very happy for Chris. I believe he has worked his butt off to get to this point, and he's looked much faster, much more precise running in the preseason. But, the funny thing is, I really couldn't tell the difference between Bill Merritt and Chris Rodriguez. They both seemed like they were both just as quick, seemed like they kind of had the same similar, run styles. The only time I could tell, that's Chris Rodriguez. How do you know? The number on the back. No, I think Bill Merritt was wearing 32 and Chris Rodriguez was wearing 36. So that was about the only way, because honestly, I thought both of them had a heck of a preseason, and I think they both have similar run skills. So yeah, the question is, when will Bill Merritt take over as RB1? He's going to get some playing time. Now I hate to say it. Why do I say that? Well, you're always going to have injuries. That's the most unfortunate part of all of this. I am keeping my eyes on Austin Eckler, because, last year he was out for several games because of a concussion, and that could open up a chance for Bill Merritt to come in and get more playing time. I don't want that to be the reason why he gets more playing time, but you have that. And of course, I'm keeping an eye on Chris Rodriguez. He's put the ball on the field, on the ground in the past. Not as bad as what Antonio Gibson did for us, but he did have a few of those. So, if you start to see a lot of fumbling, that will surely send a running back to the bench pretty quick. So, inconsistencies, injuries, those are reasons why you may see somebody like Bill Merritt, of course, making it onto the field. But I think he's going to see some playing time anyway. In the past, Jeremy McNichols hasn't played all 16, 17 games. Austin Eckler hasn't. There's going to be opportunities for Bill Merritt. And then, of course, let's not forget about the Commanders picking up Donovan Edwards off the waiver wire. He was signed a couple of days ago to the practice squad after getting released from the New York Jets. And could he be a factor down the road? Maybe not this year. I don't know. Unless we really start having an injury-prone season in the backfield, you probably won't see Edwards. But he had a pretty storied college career, I felt. He won a college championship with the Michigan Wolverines in 2023. He was a Big Ten MVP in 2022, year earlier. He's appeared in 50 games. He started 8 of those games. So now I didn't watch him personally. Okay, so not a big Michigan fan. I'm sure a lot of other people could tell me a little bit more about him. But I suspect maybe if we picked him up because he has a similar skill set like a Chris Rodriguez or a Bill Merritt, who knows? Maybe he has the same skill set as what Brian Robinson Jr. had, but maybe he's a little bit more durable. Maybe he's a little bit better. Maybe he's a little bit more consistent. Who knows? But if there is a certain style of running that Cliff Kingsbury, Dan Quinn, Adam Peters are looking for, and they see it in Donovan, then down the road we could see something special from him as well. But just know that that's kind of what you're seeing out of the running backs. You'll probably see a lot of Chris Rodriguez, especially as the season starts. But I would not be surprised, again, if by midseason we're seeing a lot of Bill Merritt. Could possibly happen. Maybe those two guys will wind up being the 1-2 punch. Don't know. And of course, how can you do a Washington Football Maniacs podcast and not mention Scary Terry McLaurin? Oh, yes. Some people who watch my podcast and listen to the podcast are just so sick of me talking about Terry McLaurin. But guess what? He's our wide receiver 1. You expect me to never talk about Terry McLaurin? He was back at practice and seemed like he pretty much picked up where he left off. I mean, he's been practicing well. He's been mentoring guys like Jalen Lane, giving them advice and, so forth and so on. And, I was watching some of the clips with Terry McLaurin, Jalen Lane. Those guys look really similar. Scary. Scary Terry. It's scary Jalen. I mean, they both look very similar in style. Like they're like, Lane is that direct mirror image of Terry McLaurin. This could be a great thing for the Washington Commanders offense. I mean, if Jalen Lane somehow shows us that, guess what? I am the new wide receiver 1B. Terry McLaurin is 1A. And you still got guys like Deebo Samuel and Noah Brown who puts in great minutes with us. This could be a fantastic wide receiving core. I mean, I am just excited about this. I know Jayden Daniels has to be excited about all this. But, of course, getting back to Terry, when it was finally announced that he had signed this contract extension, now, how many times on this podcast have I said it's probably going to be something like, $28 to $30 million a year, probably a 3-year deal, maybe a 4, but I'm thinking it's probably going to be a 3-year deal because, of course, the extension wouldn't start until 2026 next season. And if he's there until the end of that contract, he's 34 years old. So 28 to 30 million, some guaranteed money up front. The last year of the contract, void if Washington sees fit. And then the initial announcement was up to 96 million, I should say. 3-year deal up to $96 million. And so everybody on Twitter land was, saying, hey, $32 million a year, you're only going to give him 28. And, at first I was like, yeah, I'm pretty surprised at that, but, good for him. And I was like, but they did say up to 96 million. So I bet it's very incentive laced. And that was another thing I said was, give Terry McLaurin an incentive laced deal where he can have the potential of getting a huge payday, more of a prove it, because that's what Adam Peters seems to do with a lot of his contracts that he signs, is he signs a lot of these prove it deals. And guess what? No different with Terry McLaurin. When we finally got the real numbers in, guess what? It was closer to what I said. What did I say? $28 to $30 million a year. So the base deal was a 3-year deal with a base salary of $87 million per year, which turned out to be around $29 million. So he split the difference with $44 million guaranteed up front. But here's the big kicker here. No guaranteed money after the 2026 season. So a lot of people at that point were saying, so, basically it's a 2-year deal. Well, actually, honestly, it's more of a 1-year deal because Terry McLaurin is basically, he's getting over $40 million up front in 2026, plus whatever incentives that he reaches, depending on how well he plays. And then there's no more guaranteed money after 2026. Now, yeah, Terry will play in 27. I guarantee it, unless something majorly wrong happens, which I hope doesn't. But Terry will play in 2027. I know this. Will he play in 28? Who knows? I do feel like he's going to wind up honoring that entire 3-year contract because he's going to ball out. We all know he's going to ball out. Adam Peters knows he's going to ball out. But this really turned out to be a contract that was great for both parties. So who won this contract? I know people are always worried about that, as if they're the ones who are writing the checks. I would probably tell you that on the surface, Adam Peters and the Commanders won the contract because they're not on the hook for Terry McLaurin after next year. They could easily just write it off after that. That's it. Especially if Terry doesn't have that great of a season this year. But at the same time, Terry does get a solid amount of money guaranteed at the beginning of the year, or at the beginning of this contract, I should say. And, so it was enough to make him happy. He was ecstatic with the deal. And so was the Commanders. But the Commanders were not on the hook. So guess what this means? It's still almost one of those 1-year prove-it deals that Adam Peters seems to be able to work in, even into a multi-year contract. At the end of the day, it could be a 1-year contract, and it's, it doesn't really hurt the Commanders as much as what people would think. But yeah, again, I'm no dummy. I expect Terry McLaurin to ball out, and he will. I mean, he's going to collect. We all know that. It's a win-win for everybody. I think Peters would be ecstatic if this happens because obviously we don't need to worry about going out and finding a number 1 wide receiver anytime soon. And who knows? We may have Terry McLaurin's successor in Jayden Lane. He might be the next wide receiver 1. We don't know. But, with or I should say with Jayden Daniels having a wide receiving core of Terry McLaurin, Deebo Samuel, Noah Brown, Jayden Lane, of course, Luke McCaffrey to throw to. And then you got the tight ends, guys like Zach Ertz. Is Jayden the next Patrick Mahomes? Well, I'm telling you right now, this answer is extremely easy to say. That's no. He's not going to be the next Patrick Mahomes. He's going to be the next Jayden Daniels. And I believe that might be better for Jayden, might be better for the Commanders, rather than to be compared to Patrick Mahomes. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Patrick Mahomes. I love his style of play. I love the fact that he's a young man who's already won multiple Super Bowls. But I believe that Jayden brings something different. I don't know what it is. He brings something different to the table. I mean, he's got the calm, cool poise like Joe Montana. Now that's honestly someone, if I'm going to, at this early juncture, compare Jayden Daniels to a quarterback in terms of personality, maybe in terms of the intangibles, I would compare him to Joe Montana. Now, for you guys under the age of 40, you probably never really got to see Joe Montana play, especially in his prime. So, you just have to take my word for it. But Joe was the epitome of cool. They called him Joe Cool. I'll never forget in the Super Bowls that winning drive that the San Francisco 49ers had against the Cincinnati Bengals. And they started like deep inside their own territory. And this is like crunch time of the Super Bowl. As a matter of fact, I think Cincinnati might have been leading at that point. And what does Joe do? He kind of just looks up into the crowd and he goes, "Is that John Candy?" I mean, he was just thrown off by the fact that John Candy was there attending the Super Bowl. He was fascinated by that. And then what happened? Well, huddled up and then just slick as a button, it moved the San Francisco 49ers methodically down the field, chewed up time. I think his game-winning, well, I don't know if his game-winning pass, but it's what put San Francisco in front to John Taylor, I believe it was. And, you know, he does stuff like that because he was Joe Cool. That's more of what I picture Jayden Daniels being. I mean, now you have other guys like Tom Brady, the GOAT, but you know, Tom seemed like he could really show his personality, his emotions and stuff on the field. You could tell if he's getting upset. You could tell if he's happy. You know, he's fired up and all that. Now, Joe Montana every now and then would, you know, wave his arm and stuff like that. But, you know, Joe really just, I mean, he was just calm, cool, and collected. Even our very own Joe Theismann, he never really showed a lot of emotion on the field either. You know, he was kind of another Joe Cool, but of course, Joe Montana was probably the most successful out of the two quarterbacks. But I just feel like, just like Joe Montana, how he seemed like he always had ice water running through his veins. That's what I feel like Jayden Daniels is. You know, Jayden just, he just goes in there and does his job. You know, he doesn't worry about much. And he said it before, especially when people were asking him about the Terry McLaurin issues, when Terry was holding in or holding out. And Jayden Daniels basically said, I can only control what I can control. And I think when a person has that state of mind, they're going to do just that. They're going to control what they can. What other things they can't control, they're not going to worry about it, because those things are just a waste of time if you're sitting there and controlling, or you're thinking about things you cannot control. And that's why I feel like Jayden is not going to have a sophomore slump. And certainly if you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, Philly fan, New York fan, you're hoping that you are going to see struggle from Daniels this year. You know, you're wanting a sophomore slump. Why? Well, naturally, they're Washington is your rival, so you don't want them to play well. You want to know that they're playing a much tougher schedule this year, and it's going to be tougher for Jayden. Well, again, if Jayden doesn't worry about that, he can't control who the Commanders play. You know, the only way I guess you would say he controls that, I mean, he really does it, but he controls, well, if they keep playing in the playoffs, he can kind of help do his part in controlling that, but he can't control who the Commanders is going to play. So he's going to play whoever, and that's been the mantra of the Commanders: anybody, anywhere, at any time. So, yeah, if you're going to compare Jayden Daniels, I'd say compare him to Joe Montana. And if you don't remember Joe Montana, go back. You know, YouTube is great for going back and seeing some old video clips and even full games. Go back and watch him play. He was Joe Cool, all right. And, you know, I'm honestly for Jayden, I'm more concerned. If there's anything I'm concerned with for Jayden this year, it's going to be how well these defenses play against the Commanders' offense. But, you know, one that I'm really going to zero in and look at, of course, is the Dallas Cowboys. And why? Well, yes, we have to talk about them because this is the biggest news of this past week. And yes, this is coming at around 35 minutes into this podcast. So if you've stuck with me this far, you are a superstar, and you should go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. But the biggest news of this past week, the trade of Micah Parsons to the Green Bay Packers. The Dallas Cowboys finally ended their standoff with Parsons 2 days after cutdown day by sending him to the Green Bay Packers in exchange for 2 first-round picks, one in 26 and one in 27, and defensive tackle Kenny Clark. Now, Jerry Jones has said that is totally possible that he could use those 2 first-round picks, maybe at least one of them, for a player for this year. Okay, that could be. Maybe he does do that. Meanwhile, on the other side, you got Micah Parsons going to the Packers and got a monstrosity. Anyway, you want to call it, he got a huge deal. He got a big deal. I think it's $136 million in guaranteed money when it's all said and done. The overall deal, it's a 4-year contract worth up to $188 million. Are you kidding me? This is a contract that is not for a quarterback. Again, let me repeat. This is a contract not for a quarterback, for an edge rusher. And he got, I think I've heard numbers of $122 million guaranteed. Okay. If it's just that, oh, gee, wow. $122 million guaranteed. But I think with incentives and stuff, it's probably, or signing bonus, probably up to $136 million. I mean, wow. Just wow. So who won this trade? Who lost this trade? Who even cares? I mean, certainly Dallas fans care. Green Bay Packers fans care. But Commanders fans, I'm telling you, they're rejoicing because they don't want to see this guy twice a year anymore. Now, they are going to see him the second week of the season, and that's going to be on kind of a short turnaround because I think that's a Thursday night game, if I'm not mistaken. And so, after going against the Giants, now you got to travel to Green Bay to face the Packers, who are going to have Micah Parsons out there on the field. So that's going to be something to see. But time will kind of tell. Did Jerry Jones just recreate the big trade from the late 80s with Herschel Walker and getting all of these draft picks that eventually built the Super Bowl team for the Dallas Cowboys and built their dynasty? Or is this just really Jerry Jones' last battle on the field, and that's it? Because this truly, I feel like, is a make or break for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I don't think it's a bad deal, but you got to consider something. Of course, they did get a quality player out of Kenny Clark, a very quality player. He's no slouch. And they got 2 first-round picks. Now, I will say this. Those first-round picks are likely to not be until the latter part of the first round. And so you really kind of start to get into the idea of, is this really teeter-tottering around a second-round pick? And maybe it's one of those where Dallas, if they are still holding on to these picks or still holding on to the 2026 pick, do they take it and, trade down for a couple of second round picks? And that's possible. But they're not going to be, unless something dramatic happens with the Packers and they just really just fall apart unexpectedly. They're not going to have top 10 picks, the Dallas Cowboys. And so I wouldn't put a lot of credence in those first round picks, but those first round picks can be doable, can be usable. And like Jones said, they can be used for a player this year or saved for the draft and dealt with later on. And I think this really does help the Cowboys in the sense of not having all that money tied up in Micah Parsons when they already have a lot of their salary cap tied to Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. So this does give them some breathing room, some opportunities. But I can tell you one thing, I won't miss him. I mean, I would have loved for Micah Parsons to have been on our team. I don't think we had enough capital to have been able to give the Cowboys what they wanted. There would have been a tax. There would have been an interdivision tax. It wouldn't have been just 2 first rounds. They probably would have wanted 3 first round picks and Deron Payne or somebody like that. They would not have given us the same deal. So good luck to Micah Parsons, except for the second week of the season. But I am glad that he is out of our division. I am glad. Hey, if you enjoyed this podcast, make sure to subscribe to the Washington Football Maniacs podcast, wherever you watch and listen to your favorite podcasts. As well, check out, this is exciting, check out the new Maniacs store that just opened this week. I just opened it this week. I'm constantly putting new stuff in there, putting more cool stuff that you can buy, but just check it out. See if there's anything in there that you like. I'll leave a link to the store in the description. And with that said, thanks everybody for taking the time to talk Commanders football. We shall see you in the next one. Take care, everybody, and hell,